The day had begun with the promise of joy, laughter, and the warmth of family togetherness. The lake shimmered under the summer sun, the surface catching the golden light as if it were sprinkled with jewels. Birds fluttered in the trees above, their chirping mixing with the hum of cicadas, creating a soundtrack of life and energy. A blanket was spread out on the grass, baskets filled with sandwiches, fresh fruit, and bottles of lemonade waiting to be shared. The two sisters, Emma and Lily, were restless with excitement, their energy too wild to be contained. Their parents tried to coax them to sit down for lunch, but their giggles and shrieks carried across the clearing as they darted between the tall grasses, chasing butterflies and each other. The centerpiece of their games was the giant oak tree, a towering guardian of the picnic site that had stood for centuries, its roots curling out of the ground like the arms of some ancient beast. The family had visited this spot many times before. It was their tradition each summer to spend at least one afternoon here, away from the noise of town, away from worries, just them, the food, and nature. Emma and Lily, only 7 and 9, loved the oak most of all. They would scramble around its roots, pretend it was a castle, and invent stories where they were princesses hiding from dragons or knights on a dangerous quest. That day was no different. Their father, reclining on the blanket, watched them with a smile, his hand shading his eyes. Their mother called out for them not to wander too far, her voice laced with affection more than concern. The girls waved back before disappearing behind the thick trunk of the oak, their laughter ringing out like silver bells. Time slipped by quickly, as it often does on lazy summer afternoons. The adults were caught up in conversation, occasionally sipping from their glasses or nibbling at the spread of food. The lake breeze carried with it the scent of pine and wildflowers, adding to the sense of calm. But after a while, their mother noticed the absence of giggles. She frowned, glancing toward the oak, expecting to see two messy heads of hair peeking out from behind it. Instead, the tree stood silent, its heavy branches casting shadows across the grass. She called their names, her voice still light, but no reply came. Her husband joined in, his deeper tone echoing across the clearing, bouncing off the water. Silence answered them. At first, they thought the girls were hiding, playing a game of who could stay quiet the longest. But when minutes stretched into something longer, the lightheartedness in the parents' calls gave way to unease. They walked over to the oak, circling its massive base, looking behind it, expecting the girls to leap out with mischievous grins. Nothing. They searched further, pushing aside shrubs, peering through the tall grass. A nervous edge crept into their voices now as they shouted louder, calling again and again into the stillness of the woods. The sense of peace that had wrapped the picnic in warmth earlier now felt heavy, suffocating. By the time they ran back to the blanket to check the baskets, hoping maybe the girls had returned without them noticing, their hearts were pounding. But the food lay untouched, the drinks still sweating in the sun. The sisters had not come back. That was the moment the first threads of panic took hold. The father sprinted toward the lake's edge, scanning the shoreline, terrified he might see small shoes bobbing in the water. Nothing. Their mother combed through the grass near the oak, her hands trembling, eyes wide with desperation. And then she saw it, a small ribbon, Emma's favorite pink one, snagged in the roots of the tree. She plucked it up with shaking fingers, her voice cracking as she called for her daughters again. Nearby, another ribbon, Lily's blue one, lay tangled in the weeds. The sight of them, abandoned and out of place, made her knees weaken. Within the hour, the once quiet picnic spot was transformed into a frenzy of shouts, flashing lights, and stomping boots. Neighbors, police, and volunteers poured into the clearing, combing the woods, dragging the lake, and calling the names of the vanished girls. Dogs were brought in, their barks piercing the night as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness swallowed the clearing. Lanterns lit the oak in flickering shadows, casting it in an eerie glow, as if the tree itself were guarding a secret it would never reveal. The night ended without answers. The sisters were gone, vanished as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Their laughter that had once filled the air seemed to linger faintly in the silence, a cruel echo of what had been lost. The parents sat by the oak, clinging to each other, clutching the ribbons as if holding onto them could bring the girls back. The picnic that began in joy had become a nightmare, one that would haunt the family, the town, and the old oak for years to come. The days that followed the disappearance of Emma and Lily turned into weeks, and then into months, each one heavier than the last. The once bustling little town, known for its easy charm and close-knit community, seemed to hold its breath. The case of the missing sisters dominated every conversation, every headline, and every whispered exchange in grocery store aisles or at the church after Sunday service. Posters with the girls' smiling faces were taped to telephone poles, pinned on bulletin boards, and hung in shop windows. Their names became echoes in everyone's mind, repeated so often that they became both a reminder of hope and a shadow of despair. The police did what they could in the beginning. Search parties were dispatched daily, helicopters circled above the forest, and divers combed through the lake's depths until there was nothing left to explore. Volunteers from nearby towns offered their time, walking the trails, peering into abandoned sheds, even knocking on doors in case someone had seen something they hadn't thought important at the time. Yet, every lead seemed to dissolve into nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no strange vehicles remembered by passers-by. Just the two ribbons, and the silence of that towering oak. As weeks passed with no answers, whispers grew louder. Some said the girls had been taken by someone who had planned it carefully, someone who knew the area well. Others leaned into old tales, stories that had always clung to the oak tree like ivy. They spoke of curses, of the tree swallowing those who dared linger too close to its roots. It had been called, the widow's oak, by older generations, a name born from tragedies of long ago. Farmers swore livestock sometimes vanished near it, and children dared each other to spend the night beneath its branches, though few ever did. The sisters' disappearance brought these stories back into focus, and many in town avoided the lakeside altogether, as if the tree itself had taken on a sinister life. For the family, life became unbearable. The once cheerful home, filled with laughter and the sound of small footsteps running down the hall, now echoed with silence. Their parents clung to each other, yet grief pulled at them in different directions. The mother lit candles every evening by the window, convinced somehow the girls would see the glow and find their way back. The father grew restless, throwing himself into endless searches even after the police had scaled back their efforts. He returned to the oak tree again and again, sometimes in the dead of night, running his hands along its rough bark, as if answers might be carved there, waiting to be found. Each return brought nothing but frustration and heartbreak. The town tried to comfort them at first. Neighbors brought food, cards, and shoulders to cry on. But as months passed and no resolution came, the visits grew less frequent. The case turned cold, and life moved forward for others, even though it remained frozen for the grieving parents. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, not out of cruelty, but from discomfort. They didn't know what to say anymore, how to ease a wound that had no salve. The parents became isolated, living in a fog of sorrow and unanswered questions. The picnic site, once lively with laughter and families enjoying summer afternoons, changed forever. The grassy clearing by the lake stood abandoned, the once inviting space now eerily quiet. No blankets were spread out, no children ran through the tall grass chasing dragonflies. Locals avoided the area, claiming it felt wrong, as if the very air carried the weight of tragedy. Even fishermen, who once lined the lake's banks, stayed away, saying the water seemed too still, too watchful. The oak tree remained, unchanged and immovable, its great branches stretching toward the sky. It became a landmark of fear, a silent witness to whatever had happened that day. Years passed, and the town grew used to the shadow that hovered over it. The story of Emma and Lily became part of its fabric, retold by new generations who hadn't even been alive when the sisters vanished. Children who grew up hearing the tale were warned by parents never to wander too close to the oak. Teenagers turned the story into a dare, whispering about ghosts of the girls who still played hide and seek around the roots. Some swore they had heard laughter there at night, high-pitched and fleeting, vanishing as soon as it reached their ears. Yet for the family, the passing years did not dull the pain. Every anniversary brought flowers and candles to the base of the oak, where their mother would kneel, pressing her forehead against the bark, whispering their names. Their father, though quieter, never gave up entirely. He clipped every newspaper article, filed away every rumor, and never stopped hoping that one day a clue would emerge. The police had long closed the file, but for the parents, the case was never cold. It was still burning inside them, demanding answers. The absence of the sisters was not just felt in their home but in the soul of the community. They became a symbol of loss, a reminder that even the safest of places could hold hidden darkness. And though life continued, Children grew up, couples married, new families moved into town. The shadow of that summer afternoon remained. The oak, with its gnarled roots and sprawling branches, stood as both monument and mystery, watching silently over a town that could never forget. 11 years later, the oak still stood tall, its branches gnarled and sprawling, casting shadows that stretched across the clearing like fingers reaching into the earth. The once vibrant picnic spot had grown over with weeds, the grass taller and wilder than before, as though the land itself had been abandoned. Locals rarely ventured there anymore. Some said the place carried bad luck, others avoided it out of respect, but most simply did not want to be reminded of what had happened to the sisters. Yet for one man, the oak and the forgotten ground beneath it were not symbols of fear but of curiosity. Daniel, a local treasure hunter, had been combing the woods with his metal detector for years. What began as a hobby had grown into something more like an obsession. He had discovered old coins, rusted tools, and even a small brooch that dated back to the late 1800s. He loved the thrill of uncovering something hidden, something lost to time. But unlike others, Daniel was not put off by the stories of the oak. If anything, they intrigued him. Folklore often wrapped itself around real events, he believed, and where people saw curses, he saw mystery waiting to be solved. It was a humid afternoon when Daniel wandered near the oak, his metal detector sweeping side to side, headphones pressed tightly against his ears. The rhythmic clicking and occasional static of the machine kept him focused, every sharp beat quickening his pulse. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots sinking into soft patches of soil, the tall grass brushing against his knees. The tree loomed above him, its roots tangled and thick, burrowing deep into the earth like serpents. At first, his search yielded little more than old bottle caps and rusty nails, common finds around abandoned picnic sites. But then, near the base of the oak, the detector gave off a strong, steady signal. Daniel paused, kneeling to brush away some of the dirt. The soil here was looser, disturbed in a way that caught his attention. It didn't feel natural, as if it had been dug up before and then clumsily replaced. His hands moved faster, scraping away at the ground until he pulled out a tarnished coin. It was old, its edges worn, the markings nearly faded. A thrill shot through him, but the detector still beeped insistently. There was more. He dug deeper, his shovel slicing into the earth. Soon he uncovered a small collection of trinkets, a broken pocket watch, a rusted key, and what looked like the remains of a child's bracelet. The delicate chain was dulled with time, but the small charm attached to it still glimmered faintly under the sunlight. Daniel froze, a chill running through him. The bracelet was too small for an adult, unmistakably something a child would wear. His mind drifted instantly to the story of the missing sisters, and a heaviness settled in his chest. But it wasn't just the items that unnerved him. The ground itself seemed marked, the soil arranged in strange circular patterns, as though someone had once deliberately carved into it. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and studied the area. It wasn't random. The patterns were too precise, almost symbolic. Something about them reminded him of old ritual markings he had seen in history books, though he couldn't place exactly where. Daniel took out his phone, snapping pictures of the strange arrangement before kneeling again to continue. Each dig revealed more oddities: a small tin box filled with buttons, fragments of glass bottles, and pieces of cloth so old they crumbled in his hands. It was a jumble of items, almost like offerings buried beneath the tree. But why here, and why mixed with something so personal as a child's bracelet? His heart pounded harder with each discovery, the thrill of finding treasure replaced by the gnawing feeling that he was disturbing something sacred, or sinister. As the sun dipped lower, the light turned golden, filtering through the branches and casting strange shadows across the clearing. The oak seemed to lean toward him, as if it were watching. Daniel brushed the dirt from his hands and sat back, staring at the collection of objects he had unearthed. He felt as though he had stumbled upon the first piece of a puzzle long hidden, one that connected to the town's darkest mystery. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had found. These weren't just forgotten trinkets left behind by careless picnickers, they were remnants of something much deeper. And that bracelet, it was proof that the story of the sisters might not be buried as far beneath the surface as the town believed. Packing the items carefully, Daniel stood and glanced once more at the oak. The air around it felt charged, as though the tree itself was aware of what had been disturbed. He shivered despite the lingering heat. This discovery was no ordinary find, and he knew that once word spread, the case of the vanished sisters would rise from the shadows once again. Word of Daniel's discovery spread through the small town faster than wildfire. At first, people dismissed it as exaggeration, another treasure hunter stirring up dust where none was needed. But when photographs of the child's bracelet and the strange soil markings reached the authorities, skepticism gave way to unease. Within days, the clearing around the oak was no longer silent. Police tape fluttered in the breeze, sectioning off the area like a wound reopened, and investigators moved carefully around the base of the tree. What had once been a place families avoided out of superstition was suddenly the epicenter of activity, buzzing with officers, forensics teams, and even curious onlookers who lingered just beyond the tape. The oak itself looked unchanged, indifferent to the chaos around it. Its roots twisted and turned, thick and ancient, weaving into the earth as if protecting whatever lay hidden beneath. The ground near it was dug carefully now, every inch sifted for clues. Shovels sliced through layers of soil while gloved hands pulled out fragments, cataloging each one. What they found unsettled even the most hardened officers. Dolls, their faces cracked and dirt-stained, were uncovered in clusters, some missing limbs, others so deteriorated that they seemed to dissolve when touched. Nearby, investigators unearthed a pair of tiny shoes, their leather stiff with age, their laces frayed but unmistakably belonging to children. The items weren't scattered like random trash but arranged deliberately, as if placed there with intention. The dolls lay in a semicircle, the shoes positioned neatly side by side, and the bracelet Daniel had first discovered seemed to mark the center. The deeper they dug, the more apparent it became that the clearing had been used for something far darker than an ordinary picnic. But it wasn't just the objects themselves. On the inside of a hollow root, barely visible beneath layers of dirt, someone noticed strange carvings etched into the wood. They weren't words in any language the investigators immediately recognized, but symbols, shapes that repeated, spirals, and lines intersecting in patterns. Some swore they looked like runes, others like crude drawings of eyes and hands. The carvings added to the unnerving atmosphere, fueling speculation that the site had been used for rituals, perhaps by someone who believed the oak held power. Forensic teams worked late into the evening, their flashlights casting beams of harsh light across the ground. Every object was bagged and tagged, every inch photographed, but the weight of the discoveries pressed heavily on the air. The townspeople gathered at the edge of the tape whispered among themselves, some clutching their children tightly, others murmuring old stories about the oak swallowing lives. For many, this was confirmation that the legends carried truth, that something sinister had always lurked beneath the shade of those branches. As the night deepened, an officer found something that shifted the entire tone of the search. Beneath a particularly thick root, they unearthed the corner of a wooden box. It was small, worn with rot, and tied shut with twine that crumbled at the touch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were scraps of paper, faded, brittle, but still legible enough to reveal crude drawings and fragments of writing. One page bore a shaky sketch of two girls standing beneath a tree. Another carried a string of sentences. Written in messy, uneven script, the words fragmented but chilling, they belong to the oak. The roots hold them safe. The discovery sent a ripple of dread through everyone present. The box, the drawings, the carvings in the wood, all of it hinted at a presence, someone who had not only taken the sisters but had believed, in some twisted way, that the oak demanded them. The items were not just clues, they were evidence of obsession, of ritual, of something carefully hidden away for over a decade. Daniel, who stood on the sidelines as the professionals worked, felt his stomach churn as he watched the findings pile up. He had hoped to uncover treasure, perhaps relics of forgotten settlers, but instead he had unearthed something soaked in tragedy. He could not shake the image of those tiny shoes, neatly placed, as if their owner had been told to take them off before stepping into some horrible fate. By the following morning, news crews arrived, their cameras flashing, their reporters pressing microphones against the police tape. The town's darkest mystery was no longer a quiet, haunting memory, it was headline news. Authorities confirmed the site was being treated as a crime scene, though they stopped short of saying what they believed had happened. The family of Emma and Lily, now older and frailer, were notified. Their mother returned to the oak for the first time in years, her face drawn and pale as she watched investigators carry boxes of evidence away. She clutched the police tape with trembling hands, whispering her daughter's names like a prayer. The oak, towering and unyielding, seemed almost alive in the daylight, its bark scarred by the carvings and its roots still cradling secrets no one yet understood. What had begun as the discovery of a bracelet had become the unearthing of a chamber of horrors, a shrine to something unthinkable. The town, once again, found itself consumed by whispers and fear, but now those whispers were louder, sharper, and impossible to dismiss. The past had clawed its way to the surface, and whatever truth it held was far darker than anyone had dared to imagine. The days following the excavation at the oak became a blur of flashing cameras, hushed interviews, and restless speculation. The town was no longer able to push the memory of Emma and Lily into the shadows. It had come back, raw and demanding, and everyone waited with uneasy breath for the truth to emerge. The police had sealed the clearing, forbidding anyone from entering except investigators, but that did not stop the townspeople from gathering at the edges, straining for glimpses of what was happening beneath the tree. Forensic tents were pitched, bright lamps lit the ground even at night, and armed guards kept watch as though the site itself posed a danger. Within a week, the investigation broke open in ways no one expected. Among the fragments recovered from the hollow roots, specialists found not just the crude sketches and the chilling line about the oak holding the girls safe, but an entire set of loose papers, tied together with twine so delicate it disintegrated at the slightest touch. The bundle, when carefully opened, revealed itself to be something like a diary, a record of thoughts written in a shaky, obsessive hand. Each page was smeared with dirt, some words barely legible, but the meaning was undeniable. The writer confessed to watching the sisters that day, to following them near the tree, to taking them. The words were not written with remorse, but with a strange, almost reverent devotion, describing the oak as if it were a living god demanding sacrifice. The revelation struck the town like a hammer. All the theories that had swirled for over a decade, kidnapping, drowning, running away, suddenly collapsed into one horrifying possibility, that the girls had been victims of a person twisted enough to believe the oak had power over life and death. The diary hinted at rituals, at whispers carried through the branches at night, at promises that the tree would protect what was given to it. No name was signed on the entries, but there were references to old family feuds, grudges buried deep in the town's history. One passage described the bloodline of those who mocked me, and another spoke of taking what mattered most so they would finally understand. It was enough to suggest the crime had not been random, it had been personal. For the family of Emma and Lily, the truth was both devastating and a grim kind of relief. For 11 years, they had lived in torment, not knowing if their daughters were alive or dead, not knowing if they had suffered or simply vanished into some unfathomable void. Now, though the words were cruel, there was finally an answer. Their children had not simply disappeared into thin air. They had been taken by someone who lived among them, someone who believed he was enacting justice in a twisted way. The oak had not swallowed them, it had been made a prison by human hands. The forensic teams worked tirelessly, uncovering remains that confirmed what the diary suggested. Small bones, fragments long hidden in the soil, were carefully collected and identified. The confirmation shattered any last shred of hope, but it also gave the family something they had been denied for over a decade: closure. The ribbons, the bracelet, the shoes, the diary, all of it came together to tell the story no one wanted to hear.